Namaskar to everybody. I am sorry.
You can unmute.
Unmute.
Namaskar to everybody. I am sorry there was a glitch and I could not connect for about almost half an hour. But anyway, all's well that ends well. So, Professor Agnihotri and all the dear friends who have gathered this morning for me and evening for you, I will begin with a brief Mangalacharan about Shiva, who is the god of dismantling. So, as dismantling is the subject today, so let us seek his blessings, Rudra's blessings. Ganga Taranga Ramaniya Jata Kalapam Gauri Nirantar Vibhushita Vama Bhagam Narayana Priyamananga Madapaharam Varanasi Purupatim Bhaja Vishwanatham Varanasi Purupatim Bhaja Vishwanatham. Friends, there is very little for me to say about the conference, because the conference in particular has been, I should say, nearly exposed. Although I knew that something like this was coming because I'm an very old member of the Riza list, and I could see that something was in the offing, so it was not surprising. But as Agnihotriji just mentioned, this is going to continue, and this is a long battle which we have to fight, which we have been fighting for many centuries, and we have to fight in the present time. Now, regarding the conference, as you all must have seen, if some of you attended, and I saw many clippings, I saw several clippings, long ones. The standard was so abysmally low. There was hardly a scholar. And all those 1,000 scholars which supposedly, I don't know really, but supposedly signed in favor were not to be seen or to be commented, or there was not any contribution. So it was something which was a political event mounted by Islamists and the so-called liberal left, or the Frankfurt School of Marxism. And we know that these people are well entrenched in American universities. It was something which they mounted just to feel good, because it is silly to expect that by making such noises, they are going to change the political dispensation in India. India is a vibrant democracy, it chooses its own leaders, and this present dispensation has been chosen by the people for the second time. So the conference obviously is a straw man, and it is going to it has been targeting somebody else. In plain and simple language, it is targeting the Hindus in North America. Now I must tell you that I am more or less part of you, because my children and grandchildren are either Americans or about to be Americans, and they have been there for almost 20 years. So my Vansha is continuing in North America, so I feel part of you, and whatever I think in that context as well. The first thing that I like to put is this, that out of the people of so-called South Asia, and you know that there is this term South Asia, to my mind a very obnoxious term. I've never liked it, because the only purpose of this term is to put down India or to create a smoke screen in the face of India. So out of all the people of this subcontinent, to be more precise, of all the people who have migrated and settled, the time is appropriate to conclude that the whole division is going to be on religious basis. There's nothing going to be like South Asian identity, because if different people eat some kind of a curry, or if they eat some kind of a chicken preparation, that does not bring them together. What brings them together, or what keeps them apart into groups, is primarily the religious affiliation. And that is why this attack was only and only on the Hindus. Now, the question arises, why target the Hindus? The Hindus have only suffered. Almost 5 lakhs of them were thrown out of Kashmir in 1999. Right now, in the last 6 months, they are being persecuted in Mamta's Bengal. Some very strange events have happened in Punjab, which are not very good for Hindus of Punjab, or even Sikhs of Punjab. And we know several things happening in Uttar Pradesh. But what concerns me, along with all this, is the identities of Hindus and why they are being targeted now. It is quite obvious that they are being targeted because they are destined to play a very major role in the future of United States and Canada. This is very plain and simple. In spite of all these attacks, people, the Hindus, have made a massive contribution. I do not have to enumerate before you all those contributions. They are contributions of which any sensible person will be proud of. Any American coming from any section of American society would be proud of. So, Hindus are being targeted because people don't want them to contribute more and more. What is happening is that Hindus are slowly increasing their area of influence. From the number of legislators they have, from the number of scientists they have, from the number of information technology people they have, academics that they are increasing it. And I do see signs of it, and I hope it happens more, that more Hindus go into the US Army, into the intelligence services, into the police, and into services which are called security service. This is something which is beginning to happen and which should be encouraged by us very, very strongly, because that is what they don't want. You see, they want you to keep peripheral. That is one part of the story. The other part of the story is much bigger, as we know. That is to create a whole discourse about Hinduism, which is a post-colonial discourse, largely dependent upon the colonial discourse. It is largely a repetition. For instance, whatever was said in this conference was said to me by my history teacher way back in 1964 in St. Stephen's College, Delhi. I mean, it was the same things. It is what Audrey Truschke drums up today, book after book, dribble after dribble, is what my teacher Muhammad Amin told me in 1964 in my history class, that Ghaznavi had to attack the temples of Hindus because he needed money. Now, this kind of version of history is dishonest, idiotic. It has been challenged. As a matter of fact, it cannot stand any scrutiny in the years to come. And that is why this kind of retaliation which has begun. You see, since 1995, there has been this digital revolution, and I have been following it with deep interest because I was in 1970 for 1 year a student of the famous Marshall McLuhan, who started the media studies. So I can see that since 95, when information is expanded so rapidly, the whole colonial discourse has either collapsed substantially or is going to collapse completely in the coming years. Now, with these two things, what are the challenges that present themselves before the Hindu community in America? I think the first challenge is to make a right kind of political choice. And here I would take an example of political sense from a people far off from United States. I'll take the example of the Muslim population in India. You see, the Muslims in India don't give a single vote to any person. They give a vote to the person who serves their exclusive interest in a given area at a given time. See, this is a simple strategy. For instance, they voted for Mamata Banerjee 6 months ago in Bengal. Everybody was clear, and that's why she won, and she was able to give almost a licking to BJP. Again, the same kind of strategy is being adopted in Uttar Pradesh. And now for the past 5-7 years, this strategy is very clear and it works for them. My humble suggestion is that the Hindu community in United States should not think in terms of loyalty to this political dispensation, this party or that, to the Democrats or the Republicans exclusively, but it should think exclusively but as a whole, because that's the way the American system is, of supporting a party according to the need of the hour. And that is a strategy which would be able to give a very clear assertion of the Hindu population. Of course, that's not going to be very big because the numbers are not so huge. However, it's a matter of identity. It's a matter of defining yourself. It's a matter of showing yourself as consolidated. It's a matter of showing that you know your interest and you can together ask for your interest. If that happens, then I think a lot can be achieved at the political level. But then, battles of civilization are not won only in political terms or by political confrontation. More than anything else, what is needed is a strong assertion in terms of cultivating an identity which is not rhetorical, but an identity which is very practical. Now, I am not suggesting that culture is displayed, because that sort of activity is something which the West is very clever about. You see, the West constantly talks about pluralism. That is one thing which they will always present when they accost you. They'll accuse you of being non-pluralistic, as they have done in this conference, that Hindutva is something which is pluralistic. Hindutva is something which leads to uniformity. Hindutva is something which wants to wipe out the identity of Muslims, etc., etc. That is the version. But in real practice, there is no plurality. There is always the tendency towards uniformity. Now this tendency has been there for last 2000 years, beginning with the arrival of Christianity in mainland Greece and in the area which is called Turkey now. It started eliminating all diversity of rituals, practices, and beliefs in that area of the world and replacing it by Christianity. Now that is the model of uniformity which later on Islam adopted and which is being adopted by cultural Marxism. It is primarily to wipe out all kinds of real practicing identity. So the answer to that is to preserve your identity, to practice it more and more, to cultivate your languages, to cultivate your practical culture, and yet be part of the mainstream. The great success of Indian culture or Hinduism has been on that score. India presents the greatest possible variety of different kinds of philosophies, food, this and that. It presents the greatest kind of variety in terms of philosophical investigation. But yet, it is very clear that there are certain fundamentals of civilization which are there in terms of what is the divine. That the divine can be with form or without form. It can be nirgun or sagun and equally valid. That there is rebirth. That there is above all the doctrine of karma. That there is above all the sense of dharma. These are some of the fundamentals of Hindu thought or Hindutva in the real sense, because this root tva means the essential quality. So this is something which is the great uniting factor. Now, very often we lose sight of it, and the whole discourse of the West is built upon putting diversity in our face and hiding or subverting the fundamental uniting force which has worked in the Indian civilization for several thousand years. If we keep an eye on that, if we understand that those are the fundamental binding forces which have kept the Indian civilization together, then we can keep the Hindu identity in North America alive, dynamic, and yet belonging to North America in political and partly in cultural terms also. This is what one has to understand. The massive confusion which is being created by creating a cultural isolation for Hindus. Now this cultural isolation has something very well worked out, because as you may have seen in the last almost 10 years, there is a whole theory of racism which has been evolved, that there are three kinds of racism. The racism of the white people, white versus African black. There is racism of Hitler versus Jews, and there is racism of Hindus. Hindus believing that mankind or Hindu society or Hindu faith is something that fundamentally believes in somebody being lower and somebody being higher, that it is rooted in hierarchy and not in equality, that it is in total conflict with the Enlightenment values of equality, liberty, and fraternity. Now, this is the big hoax which is being made. We know that this again is not very new, because it was Liu Dumont who said that the Hindu is homo hierarchicus. That is, the fundamental Hindu belief is that creation is in Brahma, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and he practices it that way. And that is the crux of Hinduism. In this conference, there were several statements, repeated statements about that. So this is something, it's a great big lie which is being enforced upon not just Hindus of America or Hindus of India, but on Hindus everywhere. And some of the finest academics of Europe and America are victim of this misunderstanding, that they simply do not understand that apart from this very, very social hierarchy, there is a unity of Brahma, there is a unity of proximity to knowledge, and value or purity or artha is defined in that, and every other hierarchy is something which changes with time, place, and profession. It is only a hierarchy which you find in any society, everywhere in the world, because you have to have hierarchy if you have to have a functional society. So Hindus are not exclusive. But on the contrary, Hindus have actually created a system which was far more tolerant. As a matter of fact, the more I think about or study the Varna Ashram system, and the more I study Manusmriti and several other Dharma Shastras, I find that they were very, very humane. And the amount of plurality which existed not just in theory, because Shastras are not theory, Shastras are a record of the practices of a people in different times. So these Shastras have been repeatedly talking about the immense choices that they give or they observe as being practiced in the civilization. It is a system which offers all kinds of diversities. It is a system which offers all kinds of flexibilities and choices. I don't have the time to expound upon that, nor is that the subject of the day. Those of you who are interested in going deep into it can see some of my videos, and dozens of my videos on my YouTube channel explaining how it is. But that is what we have to assert. That is what we have to bring before this kind of attack, which only makes us Hindu people who are interested in discriminating, in chua-chut, in dividing people as high and low. So this whole discourse has to be dismantled. It is actually the dismantling of this discourse which is primary to our fight. Everything else follows from it. The other reason why I found that this conference was very dangerous is that, to my mind, this conference is actually preparing for some kind of a legislation against Hindus. It seems that the plan is to bring a law that any Hindu can be accused of having practiced caste discrimination against any other Hindu in America and then prosecuted. Which means that so many false cases so many activities will be done legally to prosecute people who are very influential, who are prospering, who are contributing to the American society, so that they can be hit, so that they can be brought down. And this seems to be the whole thrust of it, that bring in a law in United States specific to Hindus, which is something not covered by whatever are the existing laws against discrimination or against equality or against respect for people or gender, but specific laws. This seems to be a plan, and we have to scuttle it even before it's is proposed or is talked about. Now, this is my hunch, and some other academics with whom I have been discussing things confirm it, and they tell me that this seems to be the target. Now, the final question: who is it that is creating all this? Or who are the people? Do they belong to one denomination, two denominations, three denominations? Are they just economic forces? Or are they just some very influential individuals with billions of money in their deep pockets? Now, I can only answer in civilizational terms, because for that I can see how there has been a whole movement of opposing Hinduism. You see, this whole world, unfortunately, for the past 2000 years has been divided into two camps, or rather the struggle of this sort began 2000 years ago. Before that, it was a very different world. If you go to 2500 BC, and if you have a look at China, Greece, Europe, parts of Africa, as whatever you knew about it, and of course India, then you see that there was no sharp distinction between idol worshippers and idol haters. People who did Murti Puja and people who hated the Murti. Now, this is something which, although was present among the Jews even before 2000 BC, but it did not acquire any kind of a significance at a larger level, because the Jews themselves were persecuted. Their temple was broken and they were driven out of their land repeatedly. This comes in with Christianity. How Christianity took over and why Christianity took over, this is a very important factor. The real struggle of the Murti Puja against the Murti, against worshipping Murti begins with Christianity. Then Islam joins it, makes it even more extreme. Then we have a system which is more or less along the same lines. You can call it Marxism, communism, Frankfurt School, whatever you want to call it. But it is primarily this whole tendency of totalitarianism. Now, why is it that in order to be totalitarian, you have to be an enemy of the idol worship or of Sakar Upasana, Sagun Upasana? Why is it that you have to, in order to be totalitarian, you have to do that? This is what the Christians did. This is what radical Islam did, or Islam when it was conceived, it did. After all, the Kaaba is only a record of the murtis that were destroyed, and the Kaaba was made, and the murtis were covered, the murtis of the famous three goddesses, Lat, Manat and Uzza. And this is exactly what Lenin's Russia did, and Mao's China did, or Potpol did, or what our Sitaram Yechuri would like to do, or what the Dravidianists would like to do in Tamil Nadu. Fundamentally, there is something very threatening about worship of the idol. The Hindus have to understand this. They have to understand it very closely, because they have been victim of a propaganda since 19th century that Murti Puja is either some kind of an error, Brahm, like Dayanand Saraswati said, or it is an inferior system of worship, like all the Brahmo Samajis and Dev Samajis and later on people, including even Gandhi, because I don't think Gandhi ever went into a temple. He only believed in a Ram, who was more of a concept, but not of a practical ritual or a sanskar or a puja or a worship of any kind. So Hindus themselves have been victim of this prejudice, and they have deeply internalized it. It is my humble submission that it is time that all over, in India, in US, in Europe, everywhere, Hindus wake up to this reality. Now, I am not making just a simple plea for Murti Puja as against the belief of Brahmo Samaj or Arya Samaj or Vedic concept of worship. I am trying to draw your attention to what I just said, that those who worship the Murti, they are the civilized people. They are the artistic people. They are the people who produced massive art in the history of the world. Those who hate the Murti, they have destroyed art, denigrated art, or made art into some kind of a pattern which is inhuman. They have taken away the image of humanity, of the human being, of man and woman, from the eyes of men and women. Now this is pure and simple history. If you look at any philosophy which is anti-Hindu today, that system is rooted in hatred of the idol. I am not trying to assert that Hinduism is equal to Murti Puja, because Hinduism, we all know, Ruchinam Vaichitriyat, Rijukutilnana Patujusham, it has an immense variety. One doesn't have to repeat that. It can be Murti Puja, they cannot be Murti Puja. But it is Murti Puja which preserves art. And if art is preserved, then culture is preserved. There is no preservation of culture without art. This is something which I think we as Hindus have to understand once again, because our whole notion of art has been nearly perverted. It has been changed. It has been taught to us that art can be pursued without the very fundamentals of pursuit of art as were done for several thousands of years in India. Art is the door to maintaining Hindu identity. Whether it is the art of dance or music or poetry or whatever art forms, because art forms change with technological transformation. We had the stage only, and then the stage got converted into cinema and other parallel art forms. And yet there are new art forms which are evolving. But it is the vision of art that creates something beautiful for man. It creates rasa. And it is rasa which is the door to the higher consciousness. Now this is something which is essentially Hindu, essentially Jain, essentially Buddha, essentially Tantric, or essentially Shaiv in the Indian tradition. You can see that the Nirguna alone, the pursuit of the yogi, was an individual pursuit. It was a pursuit of a person with a certain qualifications. It was not samanya dharma. It was not meant for society at large. What was meant for society at large was again and again sagun upasana. That is why all Jains had to make murtis. That is why all Buddhas had to make murtis. That is why all Shaivas from their cults of Aghori or Pashupa, they had to go in and make temples. And it was the flourishing of the temple which created not only art but the best possible vidyas, and all of them. Not art in the sense of art, that is something entertaining, something good, but art which is that which leads to the highest possible consciousness. Now, Hindus in America, I think, have to pay special attention to that, just as Hindus in India have to do it. This is a great challenge before all Hindus, because it is not just a question of whether I like art or I don't like art, whether I should be artistic or not, but it is a challenge of understanding how you live and what are your values of life, and how do you attain a higher and a more beautiful consciousness while living and while being a Hindu. Thank you very much for giving me all this time, and now my lecture, if the moderator and if Professor Agnihotri permits, is open to questions. Well, your question is, why this sudden hatred against the Hindus? Sir, yes. My submission is that it has been there for a long time. It has been there for 2000 years. Look at it in civilizational terms. The big change happened long time back, but Christianity, when it came to India, was in a very small area. The big onslaught by the Abrahamic religion begins, actually in larger terms, begins in the 11th century with the Delhi Sultanate. So you have this onslaught for 1,000 years. This little conference or so many other conferences that happen, or denial of visa to Narendra Modi once, or there may be a denial of visa to somebody else again. All these things are part of this large event. And Hindus, in order to survive, in order to live happily, in order to be what they are, have to deal with this in those terms. So it is not just a sudden phenomena. It is part of their existence. That's how they are made up. You see, Christianity over, let us say, over last 300 or 400 years has undergone a change. I mean, they are undergoing a lot of change regarding gender, regarding homosexuality, regarding sexual relations. There is a big change. Nothing of that sort is to be seen in Islam. Now, those who are radically backward It's an oxymoron, radical backwardness. But those who are radically backward, they would resist the most, they would fight the most, and this is exactly what's happening. You can see that in the last 1 decade, there is a very clear nexus between the liberal left or the Marxist and the Islamists. It's very well known because Marxism has lost any ideological standing that it ever had. It is now anarchist. And the people who are using them as useful idiots are the radical Islamists. This whole conference is part of that. I don't want to say much more about this conference because I know a large number of people in this conference for last 20 or 30 years. There are some of them who were my students back in Delhi University. So I have seen their whole progress. It's part of this civilizational conflict. Hindus have to deal with it in terms of civilizational fight. And we have not to be ashamed of anything because we have always practiced the good of all. We have always practiced Sarve Sukhina Santu. And our whole system adopts that. But we have to have a confrontation because others believe in exactly the opposite. So it's not a sudden thing. Well, your question is about the ground battle where our children are threatened by all kinds of real discrimination. And I am with you because I have 3 grandchildren and one of them is 11-year-old going to a Baptist school. So I see these things and I study these things and it's part of my daily concern. The general answer is that one has to create not special institutions only, but also a daily practice of cultivating your culture. And that can only be done if you are in touch with organizations in your city, in your neighborhood, specifically for Hindu practices, which the Hindu people have to make. You see, we have a similar battle here in India. The battle is here in India is defined this way, that all the temples, thousands or hundreds and thousands of Hindu temples are in government hands. And every government, including the BJP, has no mind to give it back to the Hindus. I mean, I sometimes incur a lot of wrath from the present political dispensation for saying this, but this is the truth. Now, that area of cultivation, of education has been denied to Hindus purposely. Why is it that even the BJP doesn't want to hand over the Hindu temples back to Hindus in India? Because they don't want that the immense wealth of the temples should be used for Hindu cultural religious purposes. Now, a similar situation obtains at a smaller level in America because Hindus are Hindus whether in India or in America. The American temples, Hindu temples, which I think are more than 1,000 or maybe 1,200 US and Canada together, at least 100 of them have to become centers of education, all kinds of education. They have to become centers of learning because a Hindu temple in history was a place of learning, of vidyas, of arts, of all kinds of darshanas. And that is something which is going to provide a great help for the Hindus in America to flower, to be themselves. I mean, this is something I had made attempts about 5-6 years ago by contacting, the different heads of major temples. And I think this is something which can be put into practice. Because you don't have to be, verbally believing Hindu like Shashi Tharoor that, I can go to the temple, I don't go to the temple, I'm still a Hindu. Now we don't have to be that way. We have to be practically Hindu. Because Hinduism rests in doing something. Manasa vacha karmana. By mind, by speech, and by action. By body. Now this is this fundamental unity of activity which constitutes Hinduism. That's my answer. Hindus have to be now assertive. I'm using the word assertive, not aggressive or violent. Assertive. They have to give up the ideas that they never conquered any country. Please don't forget, not through military conquest, but through cultural conquest, domination, influence, whatever you call it, India influenced the world from 2nd century AD till almost 8th century AD for more than 1200 years, right up to Japan on this side, and earlier, right up to Greece. In 1000 BC or even much earlier, 3 to 4000 BC. So Hindus have to stop saying this, that we don't conquer. We conquer, but we don't conquer with arms. And we are going to conquer again. That's one thing. It's a radical change of discourse which is needed. Number 2, you have to be prepared to say that if others have a right to convert, then we also have a right to convert. By conversion, I mean simple conversion. If others can say that they can do dawa or they can baptize, then I as a Hindu should also say that, look, I am going to talk to you about what is Hinduism and how it is better than Christianity, how it is better than Islam. I don't see what is wrong with Hindus taking that stance. You see that Gandhi Baba's stance of Sarv Dharm Saman hai, Sarv Ek Se hai, koi farak nahi hai. This is something which is un-Indian. Thousands of years of Indian discourse is against and different from it. So instead of having that dhimmi discourse in which we said, no, we have never harmed anybody, no, we are the people who will maintain our culture in United States, but our culture will remain in our closet, as it used to do in 50s and 60s. When I came to be educated here in late 60s, I could see that we had put our culture in our closets. So you have to come out of that. We have to come out of that even in India. It's not something specific to Hindus in America. It is to the Indians as well. The whole discourse needs to be changed. Once the intellectual discourse changes, other things will follow. Only one line answer. Sends thousands and thousands of emails to Shri Narendra Modi. Give back the Hindu temples to Hindus. Shri Narendra Modi as a political leader should know that there is a demand, a clear, honest demand. और कोई रास्ता नहीं है. Political pressure आपको इस्तेमाल करना होगा. उसके बिना आपको एक छोटा सा शिवालय भी बीजेपी वापस नहीं देगी.